Donald Trump actually had a plan for Greenland, and it looks like it's working out. But that doesn't mean that things will turn out well for the United States in the end, or that the Greenland deal was a good deal for the United States after all. Find out in this video what Trump may get in Greenland and its consequences for the United States. Holy Straw says, save the most at Holy Now with my code. Trump stated that the United States wanted to annex Greenland under his leadership. If that wasn't accepted, there would be tariffs. Those are now off the table, and so is military force. He has since ruled that out. But that was before. In fact, there was even a threat of a potential military takeover against a NATO ally. After talks with Mark Rutte in Davos, it was now announced that an agreement had been reached. However, this agreement has not yet been signed, so a lot can still change. But we want to discuss the current status here. The new agreement will be a renegotiation of the security agreement from the United States of America and the Kingdom of Denmark. Based on this agreement, the United States of America currently maintains a military base and has operated numerous other military bases in Greenland in the past. Golden Dome is also said to be part of the agreement. The missile defense system that Trump is planning is also supposed to have positions in Greenland and will probably be a part of it. This should be considered in the new negotiations. Additionally, according to the statement, the United States should have a say in investment control in order to keep China and Russia at bay. There, if they don't want it, regarding investments in Greenland. Additionally, the Europeans will take greater care of security in the Arctic, and part of the new negotiations is supposed to be that the United States will gain sovereignty over the military bases in Greenland, following the example of the British bases in Cyprus. This would effectively put parts of Greenland in order. Ownership. How true this is remains unclear. As NATO and Denmark say, there will be no compromises on sovereignty. You also don't have to make any compromises with your privacy when you use today's sponsor. If you hate unwanted emails and calls as much as I do, today's video sponsor can help you. Incogni has a very simple business model. For a small fee, our data will be deleted from the internet. There are tons of free offers on the internet that we accept, even though we know the saying, if we're not paying for the product, we are the product. All these websites and apps either show us ads or collect our personal data to sell it to data brokers. That's not just our email addresses and names, but often also our date of birth, home addresses, and our buying and browsing behavior. Every search query, every product you look at can be tracked. This data can then be used for spam. Also, companies may raise insurance premiums or loan costs. Insurance could get pricier. Loans can be denied because you are considered unreliable or reckless due to visiting certain websites or using specific search terms on the internet. Incogni comes in here to prevent that. Basically, it ensures that we don't have to pay all the costs for what we use for free on the internet. You sign up, give the company permission to act on your behalf, and then they get to work deleting your data. I can track the progress directly, and with every visit, I get confirmation of more deleted entries. If the brokers cause problems, Incogni keeps at it until my data is gone. Month after month, they continue to protect my privacy. If you want to take back your privacy too, you'll find the link in the description. By doing this, you support the channel and get 60% off with my link. I now have an annual subscription, so they keep deleting my data. I'm grateful for your support, but let's get back to the video. First, about the bases. There, a regulation similar to Cyprus is supposed to be introduced. That would guarantee that the United States bases wouldn't have to leave Greenland even if it became independent, because they would then be under American control, in American possession. The New York Times writes that the United States was concerned that problems could have arisen here if Greenland became independent. We've already said on the channel before that this was at least possible. And the current government, we have to say in all fairness, the current government in Nuuk hasn't exactly helped to ease the situation. Massive advances have been made towards China. And a Danish newspaper writes here that closer relations with China are a priority, says the Foreign Minister of Greenland. The New York Times also writes that the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, did not respond to a bitter statement. In a public statement that she published on social media on Thursday, however, she seemed to accept some of the details discussed while rejecting others, including the idea of transferring parts of Greenland. We can negotiate about all political issues, security, investments, economy, but we cannot negotiate about our sovereignty, the statement said. Major resources exist, but the details will ultimately decide the outcome. The New York Times writes that access to rare earths is supposed to be blocked for Russia and China here. I addressed this topic in the previous video, that rare earths are definitely not a relevant factor in American interests at the moment. But in the medium or long term, of course, this can play a role. And in the medium or long term, it will allow sourcing raw materials from there that don't go to Russia or China. However, it also stops these two nations from secretly using Greenland facilities for espionage or military purposes, which is theoretically possible. Let's move on to the NATO mission in the Arctic. Greenland is largely uninhabited. In a future scenario, it is conceivable that Russia could unexpectedly land troops in Greenland. In this scenario, cities wouldn't be occupied, and the Pituffik Air Force Base wouldn't be attacked. Camps would just be established on the east coast. That would test NATO, which is often discussed as a possible Russian move. Scenarios there mostly revolve around Narva, in Estonia, but parts of Finland have also been mentioned. Of course, this could also happen in Greenland. And here, an argument would begin. After all, no one was killed. No one was deprived of their freedom. Should we really start a war with Russia over the fact that they're sitting on some rock and not really bothering us at all? Another argument would probably be, it's so cold there. The Russians will leave on their own eventually, so we don't need to worry. Those could be the kinds of answers you get when the Danes ask for help. But there are more NATO troops on the ground. After this drop-off, it's possible to block ideal points for something like that, because you can tell in advance where it's especially good, where you could land troops particularly well, where the ground would allow for a base that could be built quickly, where the surroundings are suitable for such a surprising, secretly constructed base. And in some cases, you can of course block such points in advance by building your own base there. But for that, you would also need your own troops from different nations on site, and that would also make it possible to react much faster. In such a case, to immediately confront the Russians with your own troops. Therefore, by deploying NATO troops in Greenland, you can make it much more difficult for Russia. And Russia might have to start combat operations in order to occupy the area at all. And with that, the Greenlandic island has effectively been placed under strong NATO protection, which once the troops are stationed, is significantly stronger than it is now. Because NATO is involved, the United States doesn't have to handle everything alone. Because of course, they could have built more bases, also due to the agreement. But they would have had to organize and pay for the logistics themselves. Building the camps and paying the soldiers on site are both costly. Soldier pay is much higher here because of bonuses compared to more pleasant places. We need to be honest about that. Without Trump's threats, it seems much less likely that such a deployment would have taken place there. So if we want to understand it, we have to acknowledge how important Greenland is for the defense of the United States. I explained that in the last video on the topic, which I linked for you there. Without Greenland, the United States would lose several minutes of warning in a nuclear strike from Russia or China. Missile launches would become much harder, but so would a counterstrike, since there'd be less time to respond to a Russian or Chinese attack. This would weaken the American nuclear deterrent. In addition, Greenland is also important for controlling access to the Atlantic. That was explained in more detail in the video. If you're interested, as I said, I'll link it for you. Of course, if Greenland's government engages with China, Washington is understandably concerned. But that doesn't mean we're showing boundless enthusiasm here, or downplaying everything. And even if some platforms that are obviously very close to Trump are now talking about the art of the deal, as in, this is how you really make deals, should we take a critical look at this? A lot of what Trump is getting now, he could have gotten if he had just asked politely, like, listen folks, we really need Greenland for defense purposes. How can we ensure American security with an independent Greenland? You could have started there and built negotiations on that. Since Denmark isn't entirely inactive, as the diplomat reports here. In addition, some unsuccessful Chinese offers to invest in Greenland's infrastructure, led to concerns about potential security risks from Chinese investments. In 2016, General Nice's attempt to acquire a decommissioned Danish naval base sparked controversy. This prompted Copenhagen to intervene, block the sale, and regain control over the base. There were concerns that this could pave the way for a future Chinese military presence on the island, and a Chinese offer from January 2018 to help extend runways in Greenland was effectively blocked by Copenhagen. So we see Copenhagen. They are by no means naive or blind when it comes to possible activities by China and Russia in Greenland. They even take action, and they even stop Chinese investments that could improve local infrastructure if they believe this would affect the NATO area. Claiming the Danes don't care about anything is simply wrong. Instead, Trump behaved like a bull in a china shop, including threats of military operations against a close and loyal ally. And that has caused damage that won't disappear even if the agreement is reached now. Europe has hardly any choice but to protect itself from future pressure and future blackmail from Washington. A video about this is currently being edited and will be released in the next few days. To avoid missing the video, please subscribe and click the bell. Now, let's address the key question many are asking. Why is Trump doing this? What was his plan? Because the fact that it was a plan and not clinical madness, as some would like to say, is shown by Panama. We simply have to say, Panama proves it, because there too it was carried out in exactly the same way. First there was pressure for annexation, then drastically less far-reaching treaties, less extensive concessions, and with that, Trump was satisfied. When did Trump last mention the Panama Canal? If that was the plan, why this one? And of course, I can only speculate here, but let's at least try to explain the whole thing rationally. It seems to me that he hasn't mentally moved on from the real estate high. In New York City, threatening someone massively might have worked. For example, I use eminent domain to take your house. Forcing someone to sell their air rights so a skyscraper can be built, which was the plan all along. If only the air rights were sought, they might not have sold or would have cost much more. And the person, after being extremely threatened at first, is then happy to have peace and maybe sells them at a much better price. After he faced opposition in the cabinet during his first term, which happened repeatedly there, his cabinet members have clearly and decisively spoken out against him. For example, the Secretary of Defense. Mattis repeatedly stopped Trump's plans. And after he faced massive opposition in the cabinet during his first term, he has now obviously surrounded himself with yes men in his current term. You just have to look at the cabinet meetings. We have this here in the Detroit News. They write, is it a love fest or a cabinet meeting? And if we look at what Trump's cabinet meetings look like, then it seems that before anyone even gives their report, there are minutes of praise about how brilliant Trump actually is, how great he is, and how smart all his decisions were. Just watch the cabinet meetings. They seem more like North Korea than the United States of America. And even Ann Coulter, who was once a big fan and one of his first prominent supporters, wrote about it on X. Would it be possible to hold a cabinet meeting without the Kim Jong-il style displays of reverence? That likely means no one in his cabinet is there to tell him the plan is a bad idea. At the same time, one reason might be that he is fixated on winning. And from that, we can infer that he may see the world all too often as a zero-sum game. This means that for him to win, someone must lose. So he insists on winning at any cost. Even with Panama, he initially declared, "We will take back the canal." That's what he said. And of course, that was understood as a demand for annexation. Then the foreign minister arrived, and Panama canceled its Belt and Road investment deal with China. Pressure has also begun to resell the ports from a Chinese company to an American one. United States warships effectively no longer have to pay for using the canal. They continue to pay on paper, but at the same time, the Canal Authority will pay them exactly the same amount for protecting the canal during that time. So it's basically just money being moved around in the books. But effectively, United States warships will no longer pay for passage. Meanwhile, there was discussion of new United States military bases and increased joint exercises with Panama's security forces. But most of that could have been obtained with a polite request from the current president, who is already politically right-leaning anyway, and he has indicated that in matters such as public order, in matters like migration, and so on, he is much more in line with the American approach than, for example, the previous president was. If necessary, they could have gone to Panama and offered them a new canal bridge for dollars. That's nothing for the United States. The result would be the same. But instead of a generation of Panamanians who now hate the United States, future generations of Panamanians would have crossed the American-Panamanian Friendship Bridge and thus improved their relationship with the United States. I've already talked about this in a previous video, which I'll link for you here as well. But as we can see, there seems to be a pattern. Trump has a plan. He threatens the nation to a great extent, only to then settle for a fraction of it or just a part of it. And from his perspective, that works. He gets what he wants. The United States warships no longer have to pay to pass through the canal, and he might possibly be able to block whether the Chinese and Russians can invest in Greenland, and he might be able to have more bases there, which might be secure, but that could possibly have been achieved in other ways as well. So we can come to the conclusion. Trump had a plan for Greenland, but it wasn't a good one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment if you want to add something. And if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss future videos. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. German time, the live stream will take place with a situation report on the war in Ukraine and a subsequent Q&A session. There you can, of course, also ask questions about this topic, for example, if you don't want to miss it. As I said, subscribe to the channel. That's it from my side. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon. I would also like to thank the supporters on Patreon, as well as the members here on YouTube. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Komp, Lieutenants Jans von Eck, Uwe du Fresne, Tubib, Karsten Schulz, Gulaschnascher, 4000 Tequila, 42, Badass, Lawyer, Matt Brick, Robert, Veal Will, Soundlab, Mothers, Half Human Half Mutt, Mahamori, Beertainment, Yenis, Goo, Anti-X, Sasha Muller, Cunningham, and Uke Stress. Thank you all. This wouldn't be possible without you.